Let's say a boxer is friends with notorious mob boss Al Capone, and say there was no evidence connecting said boxer with anything illegal, and he or she liked Capone's companionship. Would you look at this boxer differently, or is it much ado about nothing? Even here in modern times, with the most technology of any generation, we have never quite gotten away from the notion of a fight being fixed, whether it's a bad call by a referee or a questionable scorecard from a judge. Some boxers have outright admitted to taking a dive in fights, or at the very least, not giving their full effort due to some questionable practices or expectations. Now, at this stage, I think it's safe to say that there will forever be some form of presumed corruption in the sport of boxing, as two fighters can force a divide where allegiance lies with the individual fighter as opposed to what actually transpires in a fight. In some cases, we have video and can see the fix with our very own eyes. And there are also some cases where it might not be quite as visible. Either way, one fight was the costliest fix of them all. We must look into the past, but before we do, like this video, subscribe, and turn on your notifications as we're about to set the tone for the greatest stories in the history of the sport. Feel free to share and let me know your thoughts on this video in the comments. For this fight, we need to travel back nearly 125 years to December 13th, 1900. To understand the dynamics, you have to understand the fighters. We'll start with Terrible Terry McGovern. Terry McGovern was born on March 9th, 1880 in Johnstown, Pennsylvania. He stood around 5'3" with a 65-inch reach, so not the tallest of guys. This didn't matter though, as he is undoubtedly one of the pound-for-pound biggest punchers in boxing history. Fighting from 1897 to 1908, McGovern would knock out 45 opponents in his 60 victories, attributing to a 75% KO ratio in said wins. After losing in his very first fight, McGovern would go on subsequent 19 and 15 fight winning streaks, with his only loss coming at the hands of Tim Callahan, a 150-plus fight featherweight who mixed it up with multiple world champions, including young Corbett II, George Dixon, and mysterious Billy Smith, to name a few. This culminated in McGovern knocking out Pedler Palmer in one round on September 12, 1899, to win the world bantamweight title, becoming the first world champion to knock out an opponent in the first round under the Marquess of Queensberry rules. McGovern would relinquish the bantamweight title without defending it, as he made a jump to the featherweight division, where he would become a two-division world champion by knocking out Little Chocolate George Dixon on January 9th, 1901 in the 8th round. McGovern would defend this title multiple times before dropping it via knockout loss to young Corbett II in 1901. It would be in the midst of this reign that his most famous and controversial fight would take place in an entirely different division, which leads us to the man known as the Old Master. Born Joseph Gant on November 25, 1874 in Baltimore, Maryland, Joe Gans is one who many consider to be the greatest lightweight in boxing history. Gans picked up the world lightweight title on May 12, 1902, ironically by knocking out then champion Frank Erne in the first round. Gans fought from 1893 to 1909, when his career was cut short as he would die of tuberculosis in 1910. Despite dealing with such a disease, Gans would knock out a staggering 101 opponents in a career spanning 200-plus bouts. So, since we all love punchers, someone had a genius and highly anticipated idea of matching Gans and McGovern. No doubt, fireworks were expected. Fireworks were received. These fireworks, though, had a tainted and foul aroma that would ultimately haunt one of the then hottest fighting towns in the nation. On December 13th, 1900, the Old Master Joe Gans and Terrible Terry McGovern would face off in Chicago, Illinois. When mentioning Chicago and boxing, the two fit together like hand in glove. Here in modern times, Chicago's not quite what it used to be in terms of luring in the high-profile fights. Don't get me wrong, there is boxing taking place, but from my recollection, the last major card featured now undisputed world heavyweight champion Alexander Usyk, when in 2019 he made the jump from cruiserweight to heavyweight. When you look back further, there are a number of iconic fights and fighters who brought championship boxing to Chicago, featuring the likes of world heavyweight title matchups such as Joe Louis versus the Cinderella Man James J. Braddock. Now, at the turn of the 20th century, boxing would practically dissipate in Chicago. The reason being, Gans versus McGovern. On July 31st, 1900s, reports surfaced out of Baltimore noting that longtime Joe Gans manager Al Herford was ecstatic, having heard that Terry McGovern's manager Sammy Harris had named conditions for a potential matchup between the two fighters. Herford confirmed that Gans wasn't shy about the matchup, knowing that it stipulated a winner-takes-all purse clause, noting that Gans wasn't the least bit afraid and willing to sign the agreement the next day. Herford also noted that he wasn't confident McGovern would actually agree to the contest, as he and Gans had a run-in during a training camp that left McGovern up in arms, vowing he would never box Gans. Well, talks were serious, as by October 9th, reporting out of New York noted that Herford and Harris had met at World Heavyweight Champion Jim Corbett's Broadway Cafe in New York the previous night to finalize terms. Still, there was an ongoing dispute on weight. Given that his fighter was a featherweight, Harris wanted the two to meet at a catch weight of 130 pounds, with Gans weighing 130 at ringside. Herford stood his ground, noting that Gans, who competed at lightweight, which was 133 pounds at the time, would not drop below such, as he was having trouble making 133 pounds, let alone 130. Herford also wanted the weigh-in to take place at 8 p.m., allowing some time for Gans to rehydrate. This was a hard sticking point for Harris, as Gans would already be the bigger fighter and would likely have an advantage of up to around 8 pounds when the two stepped in the ring. Herford offered $5,000 in cash, seeking a reciprocal amount from Harris, betting that Joe Gans would knock McGovern out in 10 rounds. Being an astute manager, Harris refused, noting that McGovern had theoretical engagements through Christmas, and that if Gans were to knock out McGovern, his attractiveness as a star of the theoretical and vaudeville shows would disappear and all money would be lost. Fast forward to September 22nd, Joe Gans, Terry McGovern, Al Herford, and Sam Harris met in Baltimore at the Eureka Club headquarters, where the two fighters had a long conversation and agreed that they would meet for a 6-round contest, with the only remaining stipulation being the weight. McGovern's camp wanted Gans at 133 pounds ringside, while Herford offered to meet at said weight as long as it was 2 to 3 hours before the matchup as opposed to ringside. On October 13th, reports noted Al Herford was still determined to make the matchup happen and had received a wire from Sam Harris asking to meet him in Cincinnati, Ohio the following week to finalize the fight. confident that Harris would agree to allow Gans to weigh in at 7 o'clock p.m. at the 133-pound limit, and that the fight was to be staged in Chicago. Herford's intuition would be right, and on November 2nd, reporting out of Indianapolis, Indiana, confirmed that Gans and McGovern signed articles to meet on December 11th at Tattersall's in Chicago. Gans would be allowed to weigh in at 7 p.m. Additionally, the purse was to be split, with 75% going to the victor and the remaining 25% to the loser. Prior to the Tommy Ryan versus Kid Carter matchup at Tattersall's on November 27th, it was announced on site that Gans and McGovern would meet on December 13th, the date that would ultimately hold. On December 1st, it was reported that Gans was training in Colorado for the fight and looked to be in top condition, while friends of Terry McGovern were concerned he wouldn't be in condition, as to this point he was still touring as it pertained to his theatrical commitments. Additionally, it was noted that the man who would ultimately be chosen to referee the contest, George Siler, felt that Gans would have the best of the matchup with McGovern over 6 rounds. Siler was of the opinion that Gans was fighting better than ever, and given his size advantage, if McGovern chose to exchange with Gans, it would be McGovern's undoing. The fight was anticipated enough that Jim Corbett was making arrangements for an exclusive train, allowing for a special fare to Chicago for the fight if a large enough group were available. Some considered the matchup to be the most important of the time. There were varying opinions on who would win the contest, but a large contingent seemed to feel that despite the size, McGovern would be able to knock out Gans, drawing comparisons to McGovern outclassing Frank Erne, who was viewed as every bit as clever as Gans. Also, it was stipulated that Gans must knock out McGovern in order to win. Now, here's where things get a bit crazy. There was reporting on December 12th stating that $3,000 was offered to anyone who could prevent the Gans versus McGovern bout from happening. This led to a man by the name of Frank Hall, an amusement promoter, taking up the offer. Hall managed to secure warrants for Bertram M. Winston, agent of Tattersall's building, Louis Houseman, George Siler, Terry McGovern, Joe Gans, and Maurice Rauch. At the same time, an application was made for a warrant for Todd Sloan, a horse jockey, as Hall overheard Sloan talking about the contest in an encouraging manner. He asserted and insisted that Sloan had done his part towards promoting it. The warrants charged that each of the men were about to disturb the peace by promoting a boxing expedition in violation of the law. In total, there were 13 warrants issued to Frank Hall by police magistrate M.R.M. Wallace. Hall declared that not only would he stop the fight from taking place, he would stop any future fights from taking place in Chicago. He even declared that if then Mayor Carter Harrison IV did not revoke the permit for the fight, Hall would issue an arrest warrant for him as well. The promoters of the contest, who didn't take the threat seriously, offered a wager of $5,000 that the fight would take place as expected. Now, none of the warrants were served as of the night prior to the fight. By fight time, heavy betting was in favor of Terry McGovern, with $100 through $250 odds that McGovern would put Gans to sleep. Mind you, $250 in 1900 was close to $10,000 factoring in inflation. Chicago fighter Tommy White A former world featherweight title challenger offered to bet a total of $35 in favor of McGovern on multiple fronts. The two fighters were interviewed prior to the contest, with McGovern stating, "I can only say that I am in the very best condition possible and that I will do my best to win. My wind is as good as any time I have ever fought before, and I am stronger now than when I met Erne. I am just as confident of staying 6 rounds as I am of eating my supper. I weighed about 123 pounds yesterday afternoon. I take a bottle of Bass Ale every night before going to bed in order to give me the strength possible, but I do not drink any water during the day except to moisten my lips and gargle my throat." As for Gans, he was quoted stating, "I am fit in every way. Anyone that figures on my being weak on account of the weight I have agreed to make for McGovern is making a big mistake. There has been no strain in my training. I have done just enough work to get right and feel as strong as a bull. I don't underrate McGovern in the least. Terry is a fighting wonder, but all the same, I feel sure of getting the winner's end of the money." And with confidence abound, the fight went down. As if it was a blessing from God, the fight was filmed. McGovern knocked out Gans in the second round. But was something sinister at play? In an effort not to sway your opinion, take a few minutes to watch the fight and judge for yourself. Does anything look off? Is there enough here to convince you that anything was outside of the norm of a fight? I mean, McGovern was known for his punch. McGovern would batter Gans, picking up the knockout victory in round 2. Over 10,000 people were in attendance for the matchup. A day later, on December 14th, the case against the organizers and fighters was dismissed as Frank Hall requested more time in order to secure witnesses, to which the defense objected. Now, on the same day, under the guidance of a Chicago judge, an investigation was ordered with reference to the municipal government, but especially the police department, along with a host of things deemed corrupt. Prize fighting was vividly highlighted and deemed against the law. Now, a day after the fight, the Chicago Times-Herald headline read, "Gans laid down." They noted the fight was heavily scented with crookedness. Gans was knocked down 8 times in a contest with McGovern, with Gans being deemed to have been in an apparent state of helplessness. When claims of this nature are lobbied, they are usually tied to a money trail. As the saying goes,
"Show me the money."
The betting for the bout brought about suspicion, as it was noted that the day before the fight and ringside on the day of the fight, several men possessed large wads of cash, scouring the audience, offering false odds of even money that Gans would be knocked out by McGovern. "Show me the money." Referee George Siler noted that the fight had a bad look, and he did not see a blow that should have put Gans in such a state of grogginess during the first round. He also stated that if Gans actually made his best showing last night, He was so far outclassed that no lightweight on earth need ever expect to equal Terry in the fistic department. In a signed statement to the Chicago Times-Herald, McGovern stated that he did not fake and tried to get Gans out early, but he also confessed that the result was somewhat of a surprise. Curiously, in his own signed statement, Gans stated that Terry was the better man, which is all he could give as an explanation. He also noted that he was hit early and it took the wind out of him, and that there wasn't any lightweight who could stand before the power of Terry McGovern. The Chicago Tribune, in its account of the fight written by referee Siler, stated, "The fight, if such it can be termed, was the poorest and weakest from the Gans end that was ever witnessed in Chicago. I do not wish to accuse any fighter of faking, but if Gans was trying last night, I do not know much about the game." Gans, of course, is entitled to the benefit of the doubt as to whether or not the numerous body blows which Terry pumped into him at close quarters during the early part of the fight weakened him. But the fact remains that the few blows he delivered were the weakest ever sent from a man of his known hitting ability. The Tribune added, not only did the betting shift remarkably in favor of McGovern yesterday in Chicago, but it was reported that thousands of dollars were sent to other cities to be placed on McGovern. It was also reported that Gans was up nearly all night Wednesday night, and that colored sports all over the city were betting on McGovern yesterday, having received a tip as to the outcome. On December 21st, reporting suggested that the district attorney of Chicago had been told by an informant on the afternoon of the fight that Gans would quit during the fight, and the informant would be betting heavily on McGovern. Now, there was a question of the probability of that being the case, as it was noted that if the Attorney General knew, it would spell major trouble, as he did not warn the innocent bettors of the possibility of a fix. By December 26, there were discussions ongoing surrounding Gans and McGovern meeting in a return bout, as the previous bout continued to be widely considered a fake. Over time, Joe Gans would admit that he took a dive for the contest, and it was estimated that the men behind the gamble earned over $150,000. The rematch would never happen, and the fallout from the contest was absolutely massive. Mayor Harrison would attach his signature to a resolution agreed on by City Council that would ban boxing in Chicago. The order was issued to law enforcement to rigidly enforce said law. The law prohibited the exchange of funding in any form of fighting and prevented club members from providing any form of payment for fights and any resemblance of a purse being offered. Despite such, there are still those that feel that the fight was legit, and McGovern continued to maintain that he was giving full effort. Regardless, it would be 26 years before prize fighting was again approved in the state of Illinois, with the Illinois Athletic Commission being established around this time. The result? At that time, the largest gate in boxing history, with over 100,000 fight fans in attendance, was the iconic 1927 contest between World Heavyweight Champion Gene Tunney and Jack Dempsey, the famed long count fight, which took place at Soldier Field in Chicago, Illinois. Let us know your thoughts in the comments as to whether you think the fight fix was in. Was there something shady going on the entire time? Was it simply Gans who threw the fight and McGovern who was oblivious of the situation? Thanks for watching, and please subscribe to 86 Boxing for more.